Hey everybody, welcome to the Catch Up After College podcast. We're catching up after college on the lessons of life lived by leaders. We may be post-graduation, but we're never post-education. I'm Isaiah Brown, your host. Thank you for tuning in today. Today we have the awesome, the amazing Jackie Sousa.
Sousa.
Sousa. I forgot to ask you how to say your last name.
All good. No worries. I mean, I'm cool with whatever pronunciation, but Sousa. Yeah.
Sousa. I was about to say
Yeah.
salsa, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I've gotten all kinds of things for such a short last name, so all good.
Yeah, that's cool. What's the origin of your last name? Is it?
It's Portuguese from
Oh,
Portugal.
oh, dang.
Mhm. Yeah.
Habla español.
Un poquito.
Wow,
No, yeah, I
I
do.
forgot Portuguese is a whole different language. I should,
Well, it is a different language, but they are similar. So I understand Spanish pretty well for the most part, but I find that the other way around, like Spanish speaking people don't always understand Portuguese as well. It's a little
yeah,
different. So yeah.
dang, crazy. That is
Yeah.
pretty awesome. But where are you living at now?
I am in New Jersey, which is where I was born and raised, just outside New York City.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
How close is that to New York?
It's, miles wise, it's really close. It's really just, I'm in Newark, so I'm like literally just over the water.
Mhm.
But as far as like getting there, just because of the way transportation is, it can take a while. So I mean, if I'm going public transportation, I can make it to Manhattan in probably less than 30 minutes. But if I was driving in, it would be a different story, obviously. So
Yeah. I'm guessing a lot of people probably live in New Jersey than work in the city because it's cheaper or something.
exactly, for sure. It's definitely, the city itself is not cheap and also not a lot of space. So definitely a lot of people move either to New Jersey or like Connecticut or like upstate New York and kind of commute into the city. A lot of people in and out well, during normal times, a lot of people in and out every day. Right now, all of us are probably home. So, or at least a
Yeah.
lot of us are.
Nice. That's cool. I see
Yeah.
a lot of trophies in the background. What's that?
Those are relics from elementary school, honor roll, and there's only a couple for perfect attendance. I definitely didn't have perfect attendance, but a lot of them are for just honor roll, good grades. And then these over here are for Portuguese school because I also did that after school. So yeah, that's what that is. Nothing since then though.
Yeah,
I peaked in childhood. No, I'm just kidding.
it's all
But yeah, they
good.
gave us trophies for that, so that was cool. Yeah.
What's Portuguese school? Is that just learning the language?
Yeah, well, so I grew up in a really Portuguese community, and so they had this like after school, which was basically like it was catered more so like if you already knew how to speak it, but kind of perfecting it from like a grammar perspective and learning the history and the geography of the country, like getting more into like the culture of Portugal. If you came in and you were like a Portuguese kid, but you only spoke English, you probably had a tough time. It wasn't necessarily catered to teaching you that, but it did teach you like the correct pronunciations and like correct like verb tenses and a lot of that kind of stuff. So, some people do like sports after school, and I was the nerd and had to go to Portuguese school. So 2 to 3 times a week after school, I would go and do that and learn about that. And I did 9 years of that. So that was a lot.
Wow,
For sure. Yeah.
that's dedication right there.
Yeah,
Wow.
it wasn't by choice at first, of course, but in the end, I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. And how was life like growing up in New Jersey? You said Newark
I'm in
or
Newark, yeah, in
yeah.
Newark. So, well, it's interesting. So Newark is the biggest city in New Jersey, but it's it's very different from one end to another. So the little part that I grew up in is called the Ironbound, and it's called that because it's surrounded by railroad tracks. So, like fun fact. And when I was growing up, it was very much like an immigrant community. So people that came from Portugal, especially, and others as well. But when I was growing up, it was very, very heavily Portuguese. So it was interesting because I always felt like I could go to a store or like anywhere really and speak in Portuguese and it would be fine. Kind of like the way I guess in like Chinatowns, you can kind of like you have like a little China. This was a lot like a little Portugal. So I felt very connected to my background culture, even though I'm the first in my family born in the States. I got a lot of that, fulfillment that way. And then over time, the community has evolved. So there's still a lot of Portuguese influence, but now there's also a strong Brazilian influence, obviously, because of the common language, and obviously a lot of Latino culture as well. Also, because I think of the closeness in language. So it's always been an immigrant community and still is. It was good to grow up in that kind of environment because I felt like, I didn't feel different because, me being an immigrant kid, all of us were immigrant kids. So in that sense, it was very home-like, but it was interesting. I didn't know for people who are familiar with Newark, New Jersey, it has like a bad reputation. And I didn't know that really growing up until like my elementary school principal would always say like, hey, when you guys like tell people you're from Newark, you're going to get weird looks or like prove them wrong, like, be successful anyway, like rise above your circumstances, that kind of thing. And I remember thinking like when he would say that, I would always be like, but no one thinks it's weird that I'm from Newark. Like, I don't understand why he's saying that. But then I actually went to high school in a totally different town. And I vividly remember one of my first conversations there, the girls being like, oh, like, where do you live? Because we all lived in different towns. I was like, oh, I live in Newark. And she was like, oh. And I was like, wow. Oh, that's what he meant. So that was my first of like, oh, I didn't realize that Newark had a connotation. But yeah, anyways, but I loved it. And I actually still live there now. I bought a house here now and I don't mind living here. I think it is really close to New York, so it's easy for commuting for work, but it's also like, I feel like, I get to be around different cultures and I like that. So.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's crazy. I didn't know it had that kind of reputation, but
yeah, okay. Me neither.
Yeah. But you're back there now. What made you want to go back to your hometown? Because like that's always a interesting topic for different people,
Yeah. I mean, for me, so when I first got back from Australia, I was my whole plan was to like go back into the city, work and live in the city. But it actually took a while for me to get a job when I came back at like 5 months or so. And so I was living at home with my mom, who was still here in Newark. And then once I did get a job, it was just like, it was hard. Like my friend and I were looking for an apartment and it was really hard to find like a good place in the city, which it always is. But the more I looked and the more I was looking at those rent prices, I was like, oh my gosh, like it doesn't make sense to pay this much in rent and live in the city. And like, because I was looking at like prices here and where I am, and it actually made more sense for me to buy a house and pay a mortgage than it did for me to pay rent in the city, because it would be the same, if not cheaper. So, I knew that I was kind of balancing having more of a social life, which I would get in Manhattan, right, and having a shorter commute to work versus kind of being like more financially responsible. And like I said, like I'm an immigrant kid, like my mom never owned a home. She was still paying rent. So it didn't really make sense for her to be paying rent and me to be paying rent. And that just felt like it was wasting money. So I decided to instead go for buying a house. And in that, it was also like, okay, well, I can buy a house in another town, like maybe like a quote unquote nicer town or whatever, more suburban. But again, that would make my commute longer. So I didn't want that. And then also for my mom, like I knew I was going to have her move in with me. And this is the only place she's known outside of Portugal where she grew up. Like she's always been here. And again, that element of being able to walk into a store and like being able, not having to speak English, all of that. I didn't want to take her away from all of that. So it just made sense to buy here, which kept my commute short and also, kept her happy as well. So yeah, so that was kind of my thought process there.
Nice. That's cool. Yeah. Do you still got a lot of friends there that you hang out with?
No, that's the tough part, because I mentioned before, like I went to a high school in a different town than here. So I, like everyone that I went to grade school with up until 8th grade, well, a lot of them aren't here anymore either, but even if they were, like I lost obviously touch with a lot of them. You kind of keep up via Facebook and things like that, but you're not like friends like the way you were like when you were 12, right? So things are different. And then the girls I went to high school with, again, I went to an all-girls high school. They're also kind of all over the place. Some of them are in the city and some of them are in Jersey and some of them are elsewhere. And so that's definitely been the toughest part, is like building a social life, because, the friends that I do have, a lot of them are like kind of spread out. And if you do want to meet up with them, it's like, you got to plan it. It's like, you got to be like, okay, what weekend are you free? And like, what time and where should we go? And what's the central place where we can all meet up, where it's not too long for one person and not, too short for another. So that's definitely been like the toughest part, I think, just having that friend group. But, sacrifices have to be made. It was either I, be more financially responsible or keep paying rent and try to build a social life in the city. So I figured, we'll work on the social life and let's be financially responsible first. At least that was my thought. But yeah, that's why I'm a nerd. So
It's all good. It's weird how like you just move a couple cities away and you can pay for a house that's cheaper than the rent you would pay in the city. I guess
yeah,
that's America, or actually that's all
yeah,
over the world. I don't know, like in the
yeah,
big cities, but yeah,
yeah, yeah. So
yeah. So, what was life like during college? You want to tell us about the different colleges you've been to? Probably the first one first.
yeah, so I went to so I grew up and like college was always like the goal. Like I mentioned, I'm an immigrant kid and I'm an only child. So my parents didn't have the benefit of an education. And actually where they grew up in Portugal, it was very much like you did the bare minimum of schooling and then you went to work to help your family. So each of my parents only have 4 years of schooling. So my mom was very, very pro education for me. Like she, from as long as I can remember, was like, you have to do good in school, you have to learn so that you'll be okay financially and all that stuff. That was like pretty much ingrained into me as soon as I came out the womb. So for me, college was always like I didn't know how that was going to happen or how I was going to get there, but that was the goal, and I made it. I went to Bentley University, which is just outside Boston in Massachusetts, and I went there because I knew, well, so when I was a kid, I guess too, because of everything my mom would tell me, I was very much like, oh, I want to do business. And what does that even mean? Like business is such a general term, but I just knew I knew that I wanted to get into some sort of business. And I told my guidance counselor in high school, that's what I wanted to do. And I went to a really small high school, so we got a lot of personal attention where they kind of made a list of schools that they thought would be a good fit. And I remember getting the list and seeing these names on there that I didn't recognize. And one of them was like Bentley University. And I was like, what's that? Like, I don't know this school. Like at first I was like, why is she putting this on my list? But then when I looked at it, it's very much like focused on people who want to do business. And so like every major is like somehow related, like whether it's accounting, finance, economics, whatever. It was all catered to students who knew that that's what they wanted to study or along those lines. So that's why I went there. And then a few years later, I wanted to learn more about my faith and about God and all of that. And so that kind of naturally led to me going to Hillsong College in Australia, which was not at all part of the plan. Unlike the first college, which was very much like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to college and I'm going to start working and like live the rest of my life. And that's exactly what I was doing. But then, yeah, totally, decided to take a break from the career and go to Australia. And that was very much a left turn. But so yeah, two different experiences for sure.
Yeah. How old were you when you went to Hillsong College?
I want to say like 24, 25 around there. It was 2013. So yeah, just about 24, 25.
Okay.
So
So you would have been a bit more mature than the 18-year-olds that show up,
I
don't know
hope
what they're
so.
doing. Yeah. That's,
Yeah. Yes. And that was actually something that I kind of picked up on right away, right? Like a lot of the student body there, that is their college experience. That's the first time that they go, and that's college for them. And especially like, there's that joke for those of us who've been to Hillsong College where it's like, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to go for 1 year. And then you end up staying longer. And that was kind of me as well. I was like, oh, I'll go for 1 year and we'll see. And then pretty much as soon as I got there, I was like, I'm going to do 2 years because
nice.
the first year is very catered to like beginner level. And I think, there are pros and cons to that. And I know why they do it that way. But for myself, having already gone through a 4-year college experience and having already worked professionally before I came to Sydney, it was definitely like a bit too elementary the first year. And I knew that I didn't want to have gone all the way to the other side of the world and not have it be, worth it. So I decided to do a second year primarily because of that.
Nice. You mind telling us about that overall experience from even just the moment you showed up or you stepped in the door?
Yeah, so it was funny. I was listening to some of the other podcasts you've done, and I was laughing really hard when Yeshua was like, "Oh yeah, I thought I was going to do marine biology because I thought it was just like a regular college."
Yeah, that was good.
And it's funny because I messaged him too about that because I was like, "Dude, that's hysterical." But you know what? It really is funny how many of us I think didn't really do enough research before going into it. I definitely went into it thinking it was a little bit more like seminary school, like straight up Bible college. Like I legit thought we were going to get in there and like open up the Bible and like go through it. Like I really did think that. And so I remember getting there, and one of the first days, the principal being like, or maybe the first day, the principal being like, yeah, so you're all here because you want to do ministry. And I was like, wait, what? I had no idea that it was like quote unquote ministry prep school.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the reason I went. Like I went because I wanted to learn more about my faith and like just take a break and like learn more about God, and also kind of like figure out like, was I on the right path in my career and all of that. I just needed to take a break. And I definitely felt like God told me to go to Sydney, or led me there, I should say. I didn't hear a voice or anything like that, but once I got there and I saw that like so much of it was focused on ministry, I was like, whoa, like, did God trick me? Like, am I coming here because he wants to like completely change my career path? Like, you know, part of me, like for a while there, I kind of was wondering if that was the case. But I think actually the journey of being there, the 2 years, helped me come full circle and realize like, nah, like I really did want to do business, because I think part of what drove me there was my whole life was so planned out, like school, get the job, you know, the whole, like the plan, right? Quote unquote, the plan. And I think a couple of years into working, I was kind of like, but wait, like, did I do any of this because I wanted to do it? Or was I just like following a plan, or like what was kind of put forth before me? But once I took that time away, it made me realize that actually, you know, I actually do like the business world. I do like corporate America, as awful as that sounds. And I like that environment. And I think my skills lend themselves to that. And I think had I not gone to college, I might have always wondered like if I was doing the right thing. But because I did that experience, I know for a fact that like ministry is definitely not for me. But like where I'm at least right now, is for sure. And along the way, of course, I learned a lot too. So it was definitely worth it. But it just wasn't exactly like what I thought it was going to be. And in saying that, I didn't really come with expectations per se, but like it just wasn't what I thought. But it wasn't awful. It was just different.
Yeah. You say you weren't expecting ministry, but what were you expecting? Like theology classes and that kind of stuff, or?
Pretty much. Yeah. Like I really thought it was going to be more about like deciphering like the Bible and kind of figuring out like how, like what not what we're supposed to think, but kind of like what are the tenets of our faith? Like what are the things that like, this is like what we say we believe and why? And so to that end, the classes that got into that, the classes that were more about like, you know, like the class that was more about like Romans and Galatians, and actually going through it and learning about like what stuff was like, what life was like during Jesus's time and right after, and like what the social and political and religious environment was at that time, and why those books were written that way, and then like what that means for us today, and what doesn't it mean. All of that is what I enjoyed the most, because that's kind of what I thought all the classes were going to be. So, I mean, for me personally, like some of the classes that were kind of more focused on, I don't know, like leadership or like organizational behavior and things like that, like because I had already done like business school, I'm not saying I didn't get anything out of it, but it wasn't necessarily like that new for me. It wasn't like fresh, but all the other stuff, which was the reason I went, that was good. And that's what I thought it was going to be the whole time.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Okay. So, what would you say helped in the stuff that you learned there, and what didn't help as much? Because I guess mainly there's a bit of a post going on Facebook, all that kind of stuff, groups of students who went to the college and had the best experience, and it's just coming out now. But what helped there and what didn't help so much?
Yeah. And I mean, and I can only speak for myself, right? But I think what helped me for sure, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I've realized it in the years since, was and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but it really were those classes that dug into like what the Bible was saying in those and we didn't obviously go through it cover to cover, but in the books that we did, specifically Romans, that's really ingrained in my mind. We learned so much about like what that was. And like in terms of that time, like the setting. And like I think it's, people always say like you have to read the Bible in context, but like if you don't know what the context is, you're not really like gonna get it. And by no means do I think like I fully get it, but I think like that those books in the New Testament really reflect what was going on at that time, religiously, socially, politically, and how all of that blended together and how people like interacted because of that. And there's like so many things that I learned through that have really helped me in the last 5 years as we've gone through our own sort of like religious, political, societal stuff that's been going on the last 4 or 5 years. And I think had I not had that foundation of what I learned at Bible college, it might have been really hard for me to now, looking at the way things are, kind of reconcile that, like, and reconcile how people who call themselves Christians sometimes act. And that's not new. What stays with me is the fact that like the stuff that we're seeing isn't new. Like even in Jesus's time or right after, it was the same thing. It might have been a different, geographical area. It might have been different specifics, but the general circumstances of like how people are with each other and how politics plays into stuff and how religion and society kind of collaborate or don't, all of that is, par for the course. So that's really helped me. And I think if I didn't have that, I might be questioning a lot more, or maybe even like questioning my faith, just because like, it can be really hard sometimes with the way the world is today. But having that foundation of like knowing that like, hey, you're not the first one to go through this, and certainly people of faith have always been going through stuff like this and kind of reckoning with their society. I think that's been really helpful. And at the same time, also recognizing that those books, like those Bible books, they weren't written with the intent of being like a Bible that people were going to read for 2,000 plus years and be like, I mean, I'm not saying it's not the word of God, but I'm saying like the people who wrote it didn't think that that's what they were doing. They didn't think they were writing a book that we were all going to be reading forever. So that has helped too, I think, somewhat. What I think doesn't help as much, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, because I think obviously Hillsong College puts a lot of emphasis on serving. And I think there's a lot of good that comes with that, right? Like, I think it is important that people who do intend to go to ministry, well, anyone really, but especially if you're intending to go into ministry, it is important for people to get that ministry is not just about getting on a platform and holding a microphone. It is about serving your community. It is about working for free. It is about a 24/7 job. And you have to be ready for that. And I think the intent that the school tries in making serving kind of required is to really put that into you and make sure that you get it, that if you're going into ministry, it's not about like being famous, it's about serving. And so I think the intentions are good, but I think sometimes the way it outworks itself is a little bit not as great. And I think the reason is, and this is just my opinion, I think like young people, especially like we were saying, like a lot of them go there, they're like 18, it's their first time out of school or out of home. They haven't really developed that maturity to know themselves and know themselves really well, and like what they do want to do and like how to set good boundaries. And I think the school tries to say like you should set boundaries for yourself, but at the same time they very heavily push on like serve as much as you can. And people who are going to college are already like in this mindset of like, I'm here for Jesus and I want to help and I want to do good. And so they're naturally going to lend themselves to saying yes a lot, because they don't feel like they're saying yes to people. They feel like they're saying yes to God. And out of that, I think it's very easy for people to just overwork. And I'm not saying that, it's the person's fault because they should have said no. I think you have to teach people that. Like, that's something that comes with time. And like, even for myself, like, as we mentioned, I was a little bit older when I went there. And even I had a hard time with that. Like, I had a really hard time figuring out what was the fine line between self-care and like school and church and serving, and what was, if you only did the quote unquote required serving, it felt like you weren't doing enough. And that's not fair to maybe like, if that was my feeling, and I know it was the feeling of a lot of others, but I do think that the culture kind of cultivated this atmosphere where you felt like you had to say yes to everything, and therefore you burn out. And and that's not uncommon even in ministry outside of college environments. There's people in ministry burn out all the time. And so I think that it's not so helpful if it becomes so much about that people walk out feeling burnt and feeling hurt and feeling like they were used. Because I think from the college experience, all churches run on volunteers, but I think Hillsong Sydney in particular very much runs on student volunteers. And so it feels a little bit double-sided when it's like, well, I'm a student, I'm required to volunteer, but yet you're acting as if like my volunteering is, you know, because I want to, you know, it's, I don't know, it's a little bit of, and it's not that you shouldn't want to serve. You should want to serve. You should want to help your community. But it's like, I think they could do a better job of helping students figure out where that line is, and also emphasizing self-care. And it's, so I don't think it's like do away with the serving altogether, because I do think that that's needed, but there has to be a balance. And it's hard for 18-year-olds to figure that out on their own. Heck, it's hard for 25 and 30 and 35-year-olds to figure that out. And that's actually a skill that I think we're going to need forever. Like even outside of church environments, outside of college environments, in your own life, just running your life, you need to know like how to balance, you know. And yeah, anyways, I'm ongoing too much, but yeah, I think there were good and bad elements to it.
Yeah. And funny enough, I was thinking back, I didn't really have like hard boundaries, but there's stuff where I just like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like,
Yeah.
for example, you finish a conference like Sisterhood or something like that, you finish Saturday night, then you have to wake up 4 a.m. for something Sunday morning. I would just ditch that serving. I'm not afraid to say it, but or I go home sometimes for chapel, take a nap because I'm tired. But yeah, what do you think about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, no, exactly. I just think it's like I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. It's like the over and above is so much. And especially when you consider that a good chunk of students definitely have to work to pay their way to being at school. And so it's like you never really, you know, they claim that you should give yourself a day off, but how could you, especially around conferences? I remember one of the conferences, I think it was, no, it wasn't a Sisterhood, it was a Hillsong conference. Monday through Friday, right? Like, so it's like straight through, like 5 days a week, like nonstop. You're working all day. You're barely getting any sleep because you're like being bussed back and forth. And then I got up Saturday morning because I had to go to work. So I worked like a normal, you know, Saturday shift. And then I had to get up Sunday morning to do my regular Sunday serving. Mind you, I had done the Sunday serving before, which we all, you know, had to serve on weekends too. And like weekends were considered an extension of conference. So I was basically going like 8 days straight. And mind you, I wasn't even doing like logistics or anything like super difficult, but like your body still is like, yo, you need to rest. So I remember that Sunday morning, I got up, I went to church, I went to serve, and I felt sick. Like I went to the bathroom and I felt sick. And luckily, you know, I told my team leader like, hey, I don't feel well. And he was awesome. And he was like, go sit. And the irony was like, I couldn't even go home because we were at duty, and like I lived over by Dang Street. And so like, I couldn't walk home because I didn't feel well. And obviously I wasn't going to like pay for a cab or anything like that. So I still had to sit in service waiting for like the buses that would bus us back and forth. And then finally, like literally the minute I got home, I just went straight to bed. And I can never nap well. Like I don't sleep well during the day. I was out. I was out straight through until the next day. And then I woke up the next day and realized that one of my friends from first year was moving back home, and I didn't get to say bye. And that was because I had planned that last day. I was like, oh, I'll say bye to him on the last day. But I got sick and I just couldn't do it. And I think like, you know, I'm not saying it's the school's fault, but like, that's the environment that was sometimes catered, right? That it's just straight through. And you can't say like, oh, well, I'm not going to serve the Sunday before or the Sunday after because I also have to work, like, because that was part of like passing your school. So it's just like that kind of stuff it's difficult. And I think that there's got to be a way that you're not counting so much on your students who are paying to be there and who are paying to learn about God. And at the same time, you know, some people use the word abuse. I personally am not going to use that word for myself, but I certainly understand why people feel that way, feel abused, feel used. And then, you know, and then sometimes the comments are like, oh, well, if you're saying you feel used, well, don't you say, use me, God? And it's like, well, okay. Like it's, you know, like that's so like gaslighting sometimes. So yeah, I think that there's definitely room for improvement there for sure.
Yeah. Wow. So the next thing I'm thinking about is leadership, is because you say you stayed there for 2 years, and the second year you began leading the volunteers. And what does that look like when you're super tired, but you know, you have to show up and leave the next day? You can't really ditch that or else people have no direction. Did you ever come to a situation like that?
It's a good question. I think like I'm trying to recall. I guess I did a lot of like more like self-leading. Like I think a lot of my serving areas were more like, wasn't necessarily me leading a team, but it was a lot of like independent work. So I had to like lead myself. And luckily, like I'm I've always kind of done that as an only child. Like I've kind of always followed my own way, and I've been good about like just doing what needs to get done. But certainly I think what makes it difficult when you're tired is just like keeping the quote unquote right attitude, right? Because there's in Christian communities, there's definitely this expectation that you're meant to be positive all the time. And I consider myself a positive person. I definitely like looking at the silver lining, but it can be difficult when you're tired to, not complain. And so that can be hard. I think that's probably what if I struggled with that, it was probably that, right? The idea of like going in and showing up with a smile and like making sure that like you're doing everything with a good heart and a good attitude. And it's like, when you're working by yourself too, it's a lot easier to be in a bad mood because nobody has to like call you out on it. But yeah, I think that for me, that was probably the tougher parts. And I struggled with other areas of leading. Like, I think there's this expectation that you can be like out in the foyers and like looking for people to talk to, especially if they look like they're alone or whatnot. And I totally get the value of that, but I know personally, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at going up to strangers and being like, "Hey, how are you?" Like even in a church setting, I'm just very like I'm kind of introverted in that regard. So
Yeah. No, it takes years of practice. I don't think any of us are pros at that yet, but yeah. I'm trying to think on the flip side. So was there ever a time where you knew that you needed to push past feelings and do what you got to do?
Yeah, a lot of times. I think, especially during first year, I think, oh yeah, definitely during first year of Hillsong College, I would say, because there's less choice in what you do for serving first year. And I recall being, well, how can I say this? So like, I think originally I was helping out with like the coffee bar at one of the campuses. And I loved that. Like, that was awesome. I really enjoyed that. And then myself and one of my friends were asked to help kind of like, so at that time, the lobby really just had the cafe and that was it. And they wanted to like spruce it up and make it even more of a cafe vibe. And then so they like wanted food. But it was kind of presented as like, and this is not a knock on anyone who asked us to help at all. It's just like how things ended up playing out. But we were kind of asked to like, hey, like, can you guys help us kind of like make it more of a cafe environment? Let's think of ideas. Like, let's like brainstorm of how we can make this better and make the lobby like a place where people want to stick around. And so we were like, yeah, cool. Like, let's do that. But then that very quickly turned into, well, so here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to this bakery and pick up the bread. You're going to go to this place and pick up like eggs and bacon and all of that. And then you're going to like cook up 60 bacon and egg rolls every Sunday morning.
Oh no.
And yeah, like that, like overnight, it just became that. And I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And at first it was like, when you're still in that like new vibes, you're like, oh yeah, let me do that. Like, that's awesome. Like, let me help, let me serve church. But once you get there and you realize that like in doing that, you're also going to like be on your feet for the full services. You're not going to get to sit in a service that Sunday morning. You're going to come out with your hair smelling like bacon smoke from the grill, and you have to work very fast because service is going to get out and you have to literally build 60 bacon and egg rolls. And then other people come in with like, oh, let's add this to them. Let's add this, let's add that. But like, it's all like, we had to do all of the buying. Like, we didn't have a car. We had to pay for everything first and then be reimbursed, as opposed to like giving me the money to be able to do it. And so like, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to, complain about it, but I do feel like that definitely got to a point where it was just like, I don't want to do this, because it also felt like it was above and beyond what I had signed up for, in my mind. And maybe that's, an issue in my brain and in my attitude, but it was a lot. And it wasn't like a rotation where like we could do it one week and someone else could do it a different week. So it just became a lot to do and a lot to handle. And it felt like it was above and beyond, like, again, that required serving. But then it felt like once we started, like, we couldn't say no. Like, it just felt that way. And maybe we could have, but it didn't feel like we could. And I didn't want to let my leaders down either, because I had really awesome leaders. And, I knew that they were just they had to kind of like do what they had to do. And so I didn't hold it against them. I just felt like it was like the environment as a whole kind of perpetuated this kind of thing where one thing led to another, and all of a sudden, like, you were just doing a lot. And so I was very glad when first year was over and I could officially say, I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
But every time I had to get on that grill, I had to push past my feelings of how I felt about it, for sure.
Yeah. And what should a student be able to say no to? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yes, I think there are a couple things. And again, they're not my particular experiences, but as you said, like we've been hearing a lot of stories lately. And so I'm not going to, talk about anyone else's stories, but just from what I've heard and from what I've read and things I saw there and also things I've learned since, I think there are definitely elements of serving that shouldn't even be like a thing. Like people always joke when we were at college, like, oh, if you're on bathroom duty, you're like on the excellence team, right? And I get it. Like, yeah. I understand that that's like a real fast way to humble people. And I'm not saying that there aren't people that come to college that don't need humbling, like they do. But I do think that, especially given this year and what we've seen about like how quickly viruses can spread, like in retrospect, that's actually really unsanitary and kind of dangerous to have, students just cleaning bathrooms or cleaning in general. And I'm not saying that cleaning, cleaning is important and everyone should know how to do it. And I'm sure there are students who are like, I wish my roommate knew how to clean, right? Like, I get that. Amen. But I do think that there's an element of like, you're a church, you should be able to pay somebody to clean a bathroom, especially when you're a church that's not lacking funds, like, let's be real. And I don't think it's fair to make students do that. I think it's dangerous. And I think if a student doesn't want to do that, they should have the permission to say no without feeling like they're going to be judged as like, oh, you're just being uppity because you don't want to clean a toilet. I think that's one. I think two, anything that comes around to talking to people like street teams and things like that, like outside of the church environment, should always be done in a safe manner. I think, in groups or with people that are watching out for you, I think it can potentially be dangerous to go out and out into the world. And like, I'm trying to be cautious here. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, don't leave the church walls. Like, absolutely not saying that. But when you throw in students who, especially the young students that are coming from other countries and, maybe don't have the same, they're just coming in and you're sending them out into the world to talk to people, like, you don't know how people are going to react or how like that's going to go. And I think safety is really important. And I think you can absolutely do those volunteer activities, but you should have someone there responsible looking out for them, because the fact that they're over 18 and they're an adult does not negate the fact that they're still under like, Hillsong leadership, if you will. And I think you have to be careful with that, sending people out there. And there's probably others that I'm not thinking of right now. I definitely think that the way that conference serving is set up has to change. It should be either, an every other day thing or an A team and a B team. I don't know, but you can't expect everybody to do everything. And let's be real, it's not equal. Like, some people, for their serving because they have a friend or they know somebody, they're kind of just hanging out all conference. And then other people are, the men doing logistical work, like lifting heavy things, again, safety, right? Like, I mean, I get it. Like, you need manpower, but like asking just because they're men to say like, hey, go lift this heavy thing, like that can also be dangerous because somebody could get hurt. Like, I guess I'm focusing really specifically on the ones where people are in danger or their health or their safety could be in hazard. I think that shouldn't even be like that needs a reevaluation, but that's my opinion. But I think that needs a reevaluation.
Yeah. And the thing that keeps coming back to me, I think, is it like an age thing? Because like so many young people are being asked to, do all this stuff, and it's not all bad. It's not all good. Do you think they're just able to be influenced so easily because they're so young and don't know better?
I definitely think that plays a role. I mean, people are going to be different. There are 18-year-olds that are more mature than 30-year-olds and vice versa, right? So it's definitely always comes down to the person. But I absolutely do think that if you just look at it from like what it is, it's a Bible college. And for a lot of students, that they're going there because that's their college experience, because they want to do ministry. So already they're coming most likely from an environment where maybe they were a preacher's kid, or maybe they're just always been raised in church. They're not all of them. I mean, some people come in, they're like a fresh Christian, but there's a huge chunk of the student body that's definitely like they grew up in church, they're a PK, whatever. And that's all they've ever known. And then they're coming around the world because that's how much they're dedicating to their faith, is that they're literally, they got on a plane and flew to the other side of the world because they want to learn more or they want to do more. So naturally, these are people, young people that are, I don't want to say impressionable, but they're certainly ripe for the moment of like, I want to serve God and I want to do it, everything I can. And also, and I think it is important to say this, right? There's absolutely a fraction, or if not more than a fraction of the student body that's coming thinking that they're going to get a job with Hillsong, right? Let's just be real about that. There's a lot of people that come and think that, right? Right, absolutely. And it's natural to think that. And it's okay to think that too. I think people, you think that if you're going to go in and give into an environment, that you're going to get something back out of it as well. So I think all of that combined, and then the age and like the fact that like you haven't really built that resiliency or that backbone for yourself yet, like at 18 or not, or even later on in life, all of that lends itself to that environment where people, I don't want to say are taken advantage of, but it becomes easier for that to be the case. And I think too, like there's a big difference between being on staff at an organization and being a student / volunteer at an organization. And so I think when you put expectations on students that really should only be, if that, expectations for staff, it's, that's not necessarily fair. I still think that like a student is a student. And I don't mean that you should go there and have it be like all, whatever, it's just a fun time in Australia and no big deal, just go to class and go to the beach. Like, no, I'm not saying that, but I do think there has to be a bit more of a balance. And I think too, that part around like the people who do want a job, I think part of that is cultivated by what they themselves say. I mean, they talk a lot about doing 3 years, like a lot, right? And I know even for myself, I had to really hold my ground to say, no, I'm not doing 3 years. Like, I know who I am. I know why I came here. I know what I'm going back to. And third year is not for me. But even then, I had to like fight it. Like, I had to like doubt myself and like talk to, and have people coming to me. And like, I had to really defend that. And I get it. They're saying that because they don't want people to quit halfway. But like, third year is not for everyone. Heck, second year is not for everyone. And so but there's so much pressure. And then there's that idea that like, if you do 3 years, you're more likely to get a job. And again, I think that that also propels people to do a lot. And let me do as much as I can, because if I do a lot, then, then God will reward me. And that's kind of how it's set up. And so whether that's people's mistaken thoughts or not, I do think that the environment lends itself to that kind of mentality. And it's sad when you do see somebody that gave a lot to the organization, to church, did the 3 years, put in the work, did everything that they were quote unquote supposed to do, and do not get rewarded in any way. And then at the same token, you see someone who maybe did not do half as much as that, but was liked or popular or got preferential treatment, and therefore they did get an opportunity. People see that, and look, I think God works everything out in the end. I think you get what you're supposed to get based on, like, God is sovereign, and I think that if you didn't get your Hillsong job, you weren't meant to. And if you did get the Hillsong job, it's probably not everything you thought it was either. So I do think that there's like a balance to that, but I do think that we as students see that. It's very evident when it's a popularity contest versus an actual rewarding of servant behavior. And so, not that you should serve for a reward, but when you position it that's the point, like do 3 years, serve God, and God will reward you, aka we will, and then that doesn't actually happen. I can't blame people for being upset about that. I mean, who wouldn't be? That's just human.
Yeah. I think it'd be good to talk post-college too, because
Yeah.
for a lot of those saying the 18-year-old, the young students, this was their main college education. They're coming out of college, and it's like, what can you really do with that? Because a lot of people, like the people I say would have been the most successful post-college, are people who actually had like a major or were studying towards a major, and then use Hillsong College as their foundation and all they do, like leadership. But
right.
I gotta admit, I'm on the other side. I was one of the people where Hillsong College was my main form of education. So I came out not knowing what to do, and just kind of felt like, this sounds kind of harsh, like I was set up to fail in a sense, like I wasn't ready for the real world. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, man. And I can only speak from the experience of like having had like, you know, a college education before and a career before. I definitely agree though. I think like for me, like I had that as like, okay, I know I can always go back. And even when I made the decision, which was a very hard decision to leave working life and go to Sydney, my thought was always, well, I can always come back. Like there's always going to be a corporate job. I can always apply and I can always, you know, do that. But even then when I came back, it took a while. It took like 5 6 months. And for a time I was like, oh no, did I leave too soon? Was I supposed to do 30 years? Like you start getting a little afraid of that. But I definitely agree that I think as much as Hillsong College tries to say that, you know, they're meant to equip you for any sphere of life, I think the reality is that they equip you for ministry life at the end of the
Yeah.
day. And that's fine. And I think, you know, I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to raise up the next generation of leaders for ministry, not
Hmm.
for other stuff. And I feel for you, man. I feel like anyone who walks out of there with a Hillsong College degree and thinks that that's going to be a degree that will get them like the job that they want, it's
Hmm.
not that simple, right? And it's not to say that you don't learn stuff there, that you can't take lessons away from there. I think you absolutely can use almost everything you learn there, whether it's I learned this and it was good, or I learned what not to do, or you know, whatever. I think you can learn from there. But let's be real, an employer doesn't really care what you learned. They're going to look at the resume and be like, okay, well, you know, what skills do you bring to the table? Like what what did you study? And in saying that, like, I don't think regular 4-year college is for everyone either. I don't think that
Hmm.
that's necessary. And I don't think that that's like the only path. But I do think that it should be clearer to the 18-year-olds that Hillsong College is not an equivalent of going to, you know, any other like quote unquote 4-year college. It's
Hmm.
not. It's just not. If anything, it's kind of like a vocational school, maybe more comparable to like a trade school. But again, unless your goal is definitely ministry, I think that it's a little bit unbalanced for sure. And I think that that's part of why the culture is the way it is, because even though they say that it's fine if you're not going into ministry, that's not what they're catering to. So I think I think it's just like either you're going in knowing that and you're saying, okay, I know that this isn't for you know, my future job, but it's more so for my like own personal spiritual development. Um, but I do feel that a lot of people don't know that going in. So yeah, it's tough. I think that needs to be a little bit clearer for sure.
Yeah. And how do you change culture from the inside out? I know that I'm just going to give
Mm.
a low example. So I was working at Starbucks, one of those amazing post school jobs, you know.
Uh-huh. Hey, Starbucks is where it's at.
Yeah, for real. Everybody has their in between season, but
Yeah.
we had this manager. She wasn't doing the greatest job, but she actually had to go out and get surgery. She was out for a couple months. Then we got this new manager who's there temporarily, and she just changed the store around. It was clean. Everybody's happy.
Mm,
Everybody's getting the hours they wanted. But then once the old manager came back, everything just like people started walking out. They didn't want to work there
right.
anymore. Like,
Right.
how do you change culture from the inside out?
That's a really good question. And I think your story kind of has the answer. I think it's top down. You know, I
Hmm.
think and your example is very much like organizational culture too. Like I think if you think culture as in like society, I think that's different. I think there's I I do think it's top down there too, and as far as like our leaders set a tone. But I think like in society in general, like young people and like the people coming up have a huge influence on like the way the world is going to go. But I think in organizations, the people at the bottom, they can try, and it's hard. I think it's absolutely leadership at the top, and it's really difficult the larger the organization is, because someone at the top necessarily can't possibly know everything that's going on down below, and so they rely on that like middle management layer a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of times middle management layers where you see the problems, because they want to make their bosses happy, and so they turn into yes men, but then very often turn around and put the brunt of that yes back on the people below. And so if there's no open line of communication between the people on the ground and the person at the top, things can get translated differently, messages can get lost or not even delivered. And so I think like a lot of times people at the top may have good intentions but have no idea how things are really happening, or they do but they don't listen to it. You know, I think they can go both ways. But I always think about like, if a sports team has a couple seasons in a row where they don't make the playoffs and they're expected to, who gets fired? The coach, right? Yeah. Even though the players are the ones that are out there hitting or not, or throwing or not, catching or not, but the coach gets fired. And if there's a problem in an organization where some shady business is discovered, usually the CEO gets replaced, right? And so it's like anything else, and fair or not, the top sets that culture, and the top it can change it, just like the temporary manager did at your store. Now, it's not to say that that's easy, but I do think that it starts at the top. And I think the way that if you are someone who's in that position and you learn that there's problems, within your organization, I think it's important to listen to that and to try to do something about that. I think a lot of times the reason a culture doesn't change is because even if like people complain, or even if people are saying like, hey, like this isn't okay, if the top's not willing to make changes, then, it's not going to change. It always comes from the top. And I think, I know this is like a PG podcast, but there's an expression like the bleep rolls downhill, like I think if people at the top are like that, then it comes down. And sometimes it's not always the person all the way at the top. It could be the people in the middle. But at the end of the day, though, the top is liable and the top is responsible. And I think if you want to change it from the inside out, it has to start at the top, which means that if you're at the bottom of an organization and you see problems, I think if you have the guts to, and God bless those who do, because not everyone can, if you have the guts to bring it up and to say something and to raise your voice and raise your hand, and you want to, then you should. But if you notice that it's not heard and it doesn't change, I think you should give organizations a chance. I think you should. But if it doesn't change and you don't see, anything moving in a better direction, then I think sometimes you have to make the difficult but best decision for yourself and for your own health and safety and sanity, and leave, because it can be very hard to change it bottom up. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it's very hard.
Yeah. So many people get caught in the middle in that situation. But a friend of mine, I think, he's been on the podcast before. We were talking about, pressure at the top. And I'm sure you know about the situation in Hillsong, New York and all that. And like building a pastor to that kind of level, and just the expectations from them, and the stuff they're dealing with. I don't know if there's any accountability. Do you think that the church can be healthy through a structure like that, or should it never get to that kind of level, of, I guess, church celebrity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's one of the major kind of questions of the American church and like Western churches right now, right? It's this like mega church model. And I will say, like, I was at Hillsong New York from like almost the beginning. And so I did not know the leadership personally, but I was definitely in sessions where I was, prayed for by them, or, shared an elevator or things like that. Nothing serious at all. But I only say that to say that I think human people are susceptible to falling away or getting lost in their environment. Anyone is. And I think especially when you're in leadership and you're propelled to a certain status, I think whether you're a Christian or not, any human being lauded on with praise and money and celebrity and fame and power can easily get lost in all of that. And that doesn't mean that necessarily that person is weak. I think it means that there weren't good structures around them to keep them safe. And they didn't keep themselves safe either. It's not the responsibility of people around you to keep you on the straight and narrow, so to speak, if I can say it that way. I think you're always responsible for your choices at the end of the day, point blank, period. But I do think that especially in a church environment where we proclaim to be about community and to be about accountability and to hold people to higher standards, which rightly or wrongly we do, then I think it's also our responsibility to put support around that. And I think, when people are liked, and it can be some people have a hard time standing up to that, either because they themselves, are part of the organization and don't want to be like, the person saying it, don't want to risk their job or whatever. But, I don't know what exactly happened at Hillsong New York, but I do know that over the years, both before I went to college and then since I came back, and just hearing from friends that had stayed there a little bit longer, but eventually left as well. I mean, pretty much everyone that I met, and like I said, I was at Hillsong New York from the beginning, and pretty much everyone that I met that there no longer attends there. And some aren't even in church anymore. And I think to me, that's the real tragedy, because I think anyone can be susceptible to a fall. Anyone can be susceptible to making mistakes, if you want to say it that way. But I think when that is happening, it necessarily is going to affect every other level. When you yourself are not in a good place, then your leadership can't be in a good place either. And that either means that you're not leading well, or that you're relegating the leading to others, or maybe both. And again, like we said, culture, or like I said, culture starts at the top. And so if you're not being very intentional about that, things are going to get lost. Things are not going to go well. People are going to get hurt. And I have a feeling that people would have spoken up and said things along the way, and they probably just weren't listened to, or it was swept under rugs, or maybe people did try but didn't try. But if it didn't change at the top, right? And so, I mean, I don't know exactly what happened there, but I do think that, and I don't think that, I should say, that mega churches in and of themselves are the problem. I think a lot of people are going to disagree with that. I think a lot of Christians these days are like, the mega church model doesn't work. It's just business. I agree that that mega churches in a lot of ways are run like a business. They're run like a large organization. I don't know that in and of itself is the problem. I think it just comes down to the cultures within those churches and making pastors celebrities. And I mean, it's hard not to, right? Like if you really enjoy the way someone speaks and you really like the way that they decipher the Bible or whatnot, like for me, like my favorite, and I have a favorite, right, is Stephen Furtick, and I will be of Elevation Church. And I am sure that Elevation Church probably has its own dramas going on internally. But I know for a fact that I am like, oh my God, Stephen, please, like, surround yourself with good people. Like, yeah. I'm always nervous that because he, like anyone else, like he's just a human being, like we all are. And so it's so easy for us to like throw stones and be like, oh, look at this pastor, like he used to say all of this, like he said all of this, and now look at him, like he's such a hypocrite. And like, yeah, obviously, it's not a good look. But I do think that any one of us is capable of doing the wrong thing given the wrong environments. And so I think it's not I think like people can make celebrities out of pastors, but it's up to those pastors and to the people around those pastors and the organizations around them to keep that safe, to have accountability, like have people other than them making decisions. Like it shouldn't be a one-man show in any sense of the word, especially in a Christian church where we say Jesus is like the man, right? So yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling because it's a hard question and I don't have any good answers. But I think it is like, it's a mix of culture. It is a mix of celebrity culture. It is a mix of making pastors out to be idols. I think that that's a big deal for sure. And I think ultimately it is absolutely down to the person who's in that position to be very vigilant about their own lives and the way that it's heading and the way that it's going, because it never happens overnight. It's not like, you wake up one day and you decide that you're going to go off and sin and like ruin your life. Like that's not how it works. It's little by little. It's little things that you allow. It's little things that get to your head. And again, anyone is susceptible to that. So I think it's so important to just be very, very vigilant about that. And I think too, the other thing I would say that is kind of related is that when it comes to church cultures, we need to be really careful that we're not placing higher or lower standards on leadership versus like the people in church. We are very quick. When I say we, I mean like Christians as in general. We can be very quick to like, and it's a good thing. Like we're good about grace, right? Like we want to be like, oh man, all good. Like God will forgive you. Like you can get a second chance. And like, I believe in all of that. But I do think that we're quicker to do that with like the people we like our pastors and our idols and all of that, than we are with like Joe Schmo who, I saw you sitting last week, so you can't serve on the team this weekend. Like that's inconsistent. Because again, a volunteer should not be held to the same or higher standard than staff. And so I'm not saying with that like, oh, let people do what they want and whatever, there's no standards at all. I'm not saying that, but I'm also not saying that it's cool for pastors to get away with a lot when their own people don't, or when people in the church are like held accountable for things that, they're still learning, they're still on a journey, they're still growing as well. So how do you find that balance? I don't know, but I do think there needs to be more of a balance for sure.
Yeah, that's deep. Yeah, it's been an hour already, but
Has it
yeah,
really? Oh my
it's
gosh.
crazy. Yeah, I try not to look at the clock because you're flowing. So,
Sorry, I'm probably rambling, but
no, it's all good. It's very deep, and actually I have more questions, but I don't want to. I kind of
my day's free.
Yeah, I kind of have to kick my roommate out of the room for these sessions because,
Gotcha.
yeah, I don't want to keep them out too long, or else I keep going. But
right.
Are there any learning resources, any books or anything, or podcasts you're listening to at the moment?
Such a good question. So I am one of those people that wants to get more and more into like reading and podcasts, and I feel like I don't do a good enough job about it. But I will recommend a few. So from a reading perspective, like, yeah, I definitely don't read as much as I should. But one book I read recently because someone recommended it was called, I think it's called Prisoners of Geography. And it's really interesting because it's all about how nation states and like wars in the past and even current political and social affairs are often just determined by simply geography. Because I think like culture can be very much like, oh, those people in that country, they're very like war torn or this, that, and the other. Like we can be very quick to make it about the people. And that book, it's a really easy read. Like it's written in plain English, but it describes like why China is the way it is, or like why Osama bin Laden was hiding in Pakistan, and like all of these like crazy things that like you never really thought about before, but like why certain countries are more powerful than others. And it's not because like they have better people per se. It's a lot of times it's just geography is on their side. So I won't give it away too much, but that's a cool book. And from a podcast perspective, I think one that I kind of enjoyed listening to is the Love Hour podcast by Kev on Stage and Mrs. Kev on Stage. So Kev on Stage is kind of like a Christian comedian.
Yeah,
he's awesome. And his wife really runs the podcast, but he's on it with her. Mm-hmm. And they talk about everything. So sometimes it's just like a fun podcast, and other times they get into like relationship stuff. They talk a lot about Christian stuff that we don't talk about in church, like sex and other things like that. So they're really good about like keeping like just kind of educating folks out there, and they're not preachy about it. They just bring different perspectives, and they always have like guest speakers that are like experts in their field. So that one's a good one, and it's just a fun one too. Plus it's hilarious because Kev on Stage is on there. Yeah. And the other podcast that I've been getting into recently, although I should say I've only listened to a few episodes, so I can't like necessarily speak for all of it. But I learned about it through all this recent college drama, and it's called the Liturgists podcast. And it basically, as far as the episodes I've listened so far, I went back to the beginning, and the oldest ones are from like 2014, 2015, something like that. So I just started listening to them, but it's basically about people who used to identify with evangelical Christianity and how they've kind of worked out of that and yet still managed to keep their faith. And what that looks like, and what it looks like to be a Christian who's okay with questioning God, and okay with maybe saying, hey, everything I was taught may or may not be right, but I still love God and I still believe in God. And even if I don't necessarily know exactly what he looks like or what that is. And that's been really helpful to me recently. So yeah, I'll stop.
Awesome. No, it's all good. Yeah, appreciate it. And yeah, thank you for coming on, and want to let you know, yeah, never discount your voice. And I love the stuff that you always have to say is pretty amazing. And when your heart aligns with God, it just moves people forward in a way you can't imagine. And yeah, just keep going at it. You got this.
Oh, thanks, Isaiah. Well, thank you for having me. It's really such an honor. You are one of the most humble guys I know, and you're incredible in just the way that you always have a positive attitude. And I've never seen you or heard you say a mean word ever. So I don't know if you do that in private, but you're an awesome guy, and I love this podcast, and I think it's going to help a lot of people. So thank you for starting it, and thank you for having me on. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm going to promote the heck out of this episode. So, it's coming. It's coming. But
Thank you.
yeah, thank you for coming on. And yeah, anything you want to promote or for you or for a friend or anything like that?
Definitely this podcast, of course.
Okay, there you go.
I don't have any like side hustles or anything like that, but if you're interested, my Instagram is at Jackie_Sousa. If you are like 30, single and fine, hit me up. No,
Oh, dang. Okay.
But yeah, no, I don't, other than that, I don't really have anything to promote. So
shoot your shot. Shoot your shot.
Yeah, you never know.
That's funny. All right. Yeah, well, great catching up. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks, Isaiah.
It's all good. And for everyone else, until next time, we're maturing. We're going to keep learning, stirring up, and chasing after what our Creator created us to do. So have a good one, everyone. Peace.